I enjoy reading. One of the my favorite all-time classic books was written by a man who had a very unique relative. The relative's name was Paul. This guy's name was John, last name Bunyan. Really, Paul Bunyan doesn't exist. But anyway, John Bunyan did. And he wrote this incredible book. And, more about the book, and let me tell you a little bit about his life. Because John Bunyan's life was a struggle. It was one trial after another. In fact, he ended up being imprisoned for his faith and spent years of his life in jail because he was a believer. Now, this doesn't happen today. No. But yet, last year, there was a man named Pastor Syed who was an American citizen with Iranian descent and went back to Iran on a mission trip and was arrested and was held in an Iranian prison because of his faith. He was actually sentenced to die because he was evangelizing. Currently in Russia, evangelism can only take place by law in the church. So you can't go into someone's home or talk to somebody about Jesus on the street. Or you go to jail. So that stuff does happen today. And as we look at this and we think about Bunyan's life, while he was in prison, he was in a small room. In fact, if you go to Europe, you can see the prison where John Bunyan was kept and the little cell where he was kept. But it is, I've seen pictures, never been to Europe, but it's a small cell with a small window up at the top, barred window, and it's not like he could stand on something and look out. The only thing that he could see from his prison was the peak of a mountain on a clear day. And he wrote this story about a young man named Christian who was on a journey, a pilgrimage, if you will, to the top of a beautiful mountain. Now, we know that this story is an allegory. It is a story of John Bunyan's life. It's a story of your life and my life as we are on this journey of our faith, this Christian life. It's been called a pilgrimage. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says this, in Hebrews 4, "Let us therefore strive to enter that rest." Now, in English, you may not catch the word or the understanding of a pilgrimage, but the word strive in Greek, the specific word, is used for someone who was on a very difficult journey. His journey is so difficult that it is like hand over hand up a hillside. And what the author of Hebrews in this incredible sermon is teaching us or telling us is that the Christian life, to enter God's rest, is a difficult journey. He's using this allegory to get us to understand. So it is books like Pilgrim's Progress and the allegory contained within it that we find encouragement on our pilgrimage as we strive hand over hand to get to the top of the mountain when the road gets steep and the way gets treacherous. There are other books like this as well. I remember when I was in college, I was rereading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I was at a store my parents owned at the time, and I had this lady come in, and I was sitting there at the counter, and because if you wanted to see my parents at Christmas time, you stayed at the store, because that's the only time, because they worked there all the time. So I was sitting there reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this woman comes up, she goes, "Oh, you're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's really a great book." She said, "Yeah, I teach it to my high school students." I said, "Oh." I said, "Are you a believer?" And she said, "Well, yes." I said, "Well, do you tell them that this is an allegory for Christ, that Aslan's Christ. And I started going through the allegory, and she goes, I didn't even know that. She'd been reading it as literature, and she had missed the allegory altogether. You see, the idea of visions or signs in Revelation do very much the same thing that we see in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that do the same thing as we see in Pilgrim's Progress. Allegorically speaking, John is staying true to his purpose of revelation, to encourage the believers in times of great persecution. And these signs still encourage us to this very day. Now, before you stop and think, well, the preacher just said Revelation's an allegory. He didn't say that. What he said was there are visions in here that give us encouragement. So what we need to do is to be able to decipher, to play things out, to understand them. Because one of the most amazing things about these visions is this. They played well then, they play well now. Think of that all-time classic movie, Casablanca, set in World War II in Western Africa. We all know this. We all know the lines. Play it again, Sam. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, relationship. All these lines that come by, and we watch it, and it's like we're transported there. And it's a great story for overcoming struggles. Revelation is that struggle. And as we look at this, and as we understand it, the fun comes for us in reading these complete visions, and then being able to decipher them and understanding what's meaning. And remember, to quote one of Caleb's favorite movies, Shrek.
Ooh, that's gonna linger.
These stories, these visions are like an onion. There are many layers. And as we peel through and understand them, we get to see more and more of the encouragement that God's trying to give us. So this morning, as we look at the sign John was given in Revelation chapters 12 and 14, we're going to read the story, we're going to identify the characters, and then we're going to be witnesses to the encouragement that John is giving the church. To do that, though, we've got to read the vision. Now, I'll be honest with you, this vision, it's not necessarily a short vision. It's kind of a long vision. In fact, it's chapters 12, 13, and 14. Now, one of the things I absolutely learned to love when Milo was here is sitting with him and reading him a book, reading him a story. In fact, there's one that he loves. It's got animals in it. It's called The Bottom of the Boat. And it's the story. It was written by a friend of mine from Pittsburgh who... Anyway, it's a story of Noah's Ark from the animals' perspective, which is really kind of a neat story. So we would read it, and he'd pat the animals, and, we just had a great time. So because I kind of miss the little guy, I'm going to read you a story. I'm going to read you the vision. You don't have to pat the book, but if you want to pat your Bible as we're going through, that's fine. Starts in chapter 12. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain. Okay, this is maybe not the best start of a story. A woman in labor, as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to the son, a male child who will rule over the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough. And they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, which leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and the power in the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. And the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to a place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times and a half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 crowns on his horns, and each head had a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, and it had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshipped the beast and said, "Who is like the beast? Who can make war against him?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise authority for 42 months. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. He was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. He who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance, faithfulness on the part of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He exercised all authority in heaven, all the authority of the first beast on his behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men. Because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. He ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. He was given power to give breath into the image of the first beast, so that he could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image, great and rich and poor, free and slave, to receive the mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters, like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn the song except for the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as firstfruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouth. They were blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim, those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water." The second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink and maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and the image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name." This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," says the Spirit, "they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the cluster of grapes from God's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth and gathered its grapes and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside of the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. What an incredible, incredible vision. It's the end. It's the image of what's taking place. Last week we talked a little bit about this understanding. We talked about the fact that we have the time between Christ's coronation and then the time period where everything is put right. And we're in that middle time. We're between the 2 points. And this is the story of what takes place when all things are put right. It's Judgment Day. It's the harvest. So this morning, what I want us to do then is I want us to take a look at some of the characters in this story. I want us to understand them a little bit. I want us to understand them as they understood them in the first century, but most importantly, I want us to understand them in today's world. Because the neat thing about these visions and these stories, they worked yesterday, today, and they're going to work forever. So let's take a look. First of all, I want to look at the woman. Now, remember I said a lot of these images are going to be like onions. They're going to have multiple layers. The woman has multiple layers. She represents God's people before and after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Well, how do I know that? Well, Abraham is the son. The moon is understood as Sarah. So the father and mother of the Hebrew people. And then we have the 12 stars. We have the patriarchs. Now, how do we know the patriarchs are the stars? Well, of course we know, because we go back to Genesis 37 and Joseph's dream. He had the dream that the sun, moon, and stars bowed down and worshiped him. Remember, this ticked off his brothers, who ended up sending him off to Egypt, where God used him to save them. Her brightness says that she is bright. It represents a heavenly connection. Do you remember when Moses went up on Mount Sinai into God's presence? He came back down and scared the people spitless. It says his face shone, it glowed, to the point where he had to wear a veil. Her brightness represents a relationship and a connection with God. And with that connection also comes God's protection. So her brightness is the relationship and the protection that comes from the relationship with God. Again, just like Moses in the desert. Therefore, she emphasizes the faithful believers that cannot be corrupted in the midst of their wandering through the last days. Now, let me say that again. In the last days, in our days, in the time period between his coronation, when he sets everything right, in this time period, those who follow obediently cannot be corrupted. No matter what happens, we can't be corrupted unless we become disobedient. And then it says that she is in the midst of going through labor. Now, I learned something a long time ago, that sometimes medical science messes up. Connie was pregnant and giving birth to David. And she had the little belt strap that had the little sensor and all that kind of stuff. And it was really cool because I could see on the screen when a contraction was coming, and I knew that my hand was going to really hurt and all this. And all of a sudden, she says, I feel a contraction coming on. I was a man, which means I was stupid. Okay? Sometimes they're synonymous, guys. Sorry. And I looked up at the monitor and I said, no, you're not. The machine. Yeah. The belt slipped. She knew when she was having a contraction. The moron didn't. She politely told me that she knew more about it than the machine did. I think she was right. She stayed married to me anyway. Now, the birth pangs or the labor is going to be two things in this vision. Number one, it's the persecution the church is going through. Okay? It's the suffering the church is going through. But also, going back to the Old Testament, it's going to symbolize the Old Testament up to the point of the birth of Christ. So it comes up to the incarnation, which is the birth. So it's an onion. There's multiple layers. Now, there is a huge reference in this to the book of Isaiah in the coming and the birth of Christ. And then it says that she cries out in pain, again, associated with the labor pain. It makes sense. Now, this Greek word, and again, having never given birth, I can only assume by what I have seen 3 times, is that crying out in pain. This Greek word is better translated tormented. It's a pain that is just unbelievable. Now, what is amazing about this word, it is a very specific word. And this very specific word deals with a book in the intertestamental period called First Maccabees, which is the history of the Jewish people in the time period between Malachi and Matthew. And in First Maccabees, this word, which we translate suffering, or better translated tormented, is used 64 times. And of those 64 times, every one of them refers to suffering and martyrdom. So John is being very specific. The church is being tormented. She is the church. She is the bride of Christ. And she is being tormented. So the woman, or there is the woman. Now, again, could we go much? Again, each of these images could be a sermon on itself. But let's move on. There is the red dragon. Now, the dragon is actually a beautiful mosaic of Old Testament imagery. It's symbolic of all the evil kingdoms who have opposed God and his people from all time. So originally they were opposing Israel, and now they're opposing the community of believers, or the church. The Greek word here is drakonta, and it is found throughout all Hebrew writing. In fact, in another extra-biblical writing called 2nd Baruch, chapter 29, it says that the Messiah will destroy the dragon and the dragon's accomplishments or accomplices, the behemoth and the leviathan, the land beast and the water beast. And again, we see this played out in the book of Job. One of the other images that was very popular within the first century, within the Jewish synagogue community, was the understanding that the dragon was a symbol of Pharaoh and his army. That when the Pharaoh told Moses to get his people out of there, and then the army chases them to the Red Sea, this is an image that is drawn back. That the Pharaoh and his army were the dragon chasing the Israelites. So now, in the first century, we have Rome as the dragon pursuing the church, as the dragon pursued the woman. And if this is the case, if it could be Pharaoh and his army, and Nero and his army, or Domitian and his army now, it makes sense that we too can reapply this image, this allegory, to modern times. How many of you remember back in the 1980s? Some of you weren't born then, I realize that. But in the 1980s, there was a big push on end-time theology. And the Soviet Union was the bear of the North, and they had it all figured out. And then the Soviet Union fell. And then they had to reapply their images. But a lot of people were saying, well, this just can't be right. But what about reapplying these images and these allegories to modern times? That anybody who was opposing God and his kingdom and standing and fighting against his church, could it be? Is it okay to reapply these images of the allegory? And here's the answer. It really is easy. The answer is yes. Because if they oppose the church and they oppose God's people, then we can see that and we can do that. See, the dragon then is also the beast found in Daniel 7. It is also identified prophetically as Rome via the 10 horns in Daniel 7 through the fourth kingdom. The 7 crowns show that he is an earthly king of kings and a superior empire that day and at the time. So basically what you have here is the dragon setting himself up as God on earth. There comes the image. And that empire which controlled all others is seen as Rome. But the dragon, again, is more than just a metaphor. Because John describes the dragon as Satan who fell from heaven. So we can infer that Satan is the power behind the evil kingdoms. So Satan was a power behind the Roman persecution of the church. Satan was the power behind Pharaoh and his persecution of the Jews, and Babylon and Assyria and whoever wants to oppose the church today. And then in the midst of this, we get a really cool, it's like a parenthesis, it's like a breath of fresh air. We get this image of the true lamb. I got to go back to the beast. Along with the dragon, we have two beasts. One from the sea, the other from the land. And this is an inference to an Asian mindset. When I say Asia Minor mindset, what I want you to understand, it's an understanding of what's taking place in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. See, within their mindset, within the culture, they saw two beasts. The first beast was that came up out of the sea, and this was seen as foreign invaders coming into their land. The beast of the dragon was the cultural, political, religious implication of their own people. So, we can then apply their understanding to the book of Revelation, and the beast of the sea is the political invasion from Rome. The beast of the earth was the economic and religious suffering, persecution that was taking place in Ephesus itself. Now, this goes back to the book of Acts, 50 years prior to where we have the Apostle Paul in Ephesus, and he got the silversmiths all upset because Artemis, the religious figure, people were becoming Christians and not buying the silver statues for their homes. So political from Rome, you've got the economic and the religious. Now, in Job 41 and 42, it talks about two beasts. And this is what's really neat, is because it says that God basically defeats the beast. But there's an implication that there will be another greater battle that will take place between God and these two beasts. Because God killed the beast, and now it's so the sword wound, previous battle, Job that's mentioned. So we see Revelation and this end time battle as the final battle between good and evil. The blasphemous names are a reference to Daniel 7, and again refer to the Fourth Empire, also known as Rome. So these beasts are seen as mimicking the two witnesses that we talked about last week. So Satan and his beast are mocking God. All right? Now let's get to this parentheses, because we have this image of the true lamb. In the midst of this scene, we have the antithesis of Satan. We have the one true lamb who isn't standing on the land and sea. He's standing on Mount Zion. Now, Mount Zion was the mount in Jerusalem that is where the temple was, had been. Now, whenever Mount Zion is mentioned, it's always seen as a positive relationship with God, pure. Jerusalem, on the other hand, isn't mentioned because Jerusalem talks about disobedience. And in that, remember that Jerusalem had been destroyed twice. First, in 586, by a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. And then, in 70 AD, the Romans got tired of it and went in and leveled the town. And they took out the temple, they took out the town, they killed all the Jews, they went up to Masada, where they basically starved them out and killed them. The only thing left of ancient Jerusalem is what is called the Western Wailing Wall. Have you seen, maybe you've seen the picture, or you see the observant Jews going up and putting little pieces of paper in the holes in this like dilapidated wall. That is the wall of the temple. That is the western wall of the outskirts of the temple. That's the only thing that's left. Now where the temple stood on Mount Zion it's called the Dome of the Rock. It's a mosque. So as we look at this, we see the true Lamb standing on Mount Zion. Some make the assumption, the illustration, that Mount Zion is the place of the New Jerusalem after the final battle. And then it talks about the 144,000. And we need to realize that this is not a literal number, but it is symbolic of the completeness of all God's people of both covenants. The names written on their foreheads are seen as a contrast to the number of the beast. So you've got perfection versus imperfection. And throughout Revelation, this image of 144,000 is a repeated image. And it's an understanding that the believers have been purified from sin and the believers have been therefore made holy. But then we got to get back to the judgment. And here we have the angels. After this parentheses of the image of Jesus, we get back to the main imagery. From heaven come 3 angels of judgment, each building upon each other. The judgment is the dire consequences of those rejecting the gospel message. This is the message of the first angel. The second angel says, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon." And the third angel comes and declares that the followers of the dragon and its beast are going to suffer greater torment. Why 3 angels announcing destruction? Well, let's go back to numerology, and we've got the number 3. 3 is, complete, total. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Totally holy, completely holy. So if this is the case, what we have here is the picture of, are you ready for it? Complete judgment of the earth. Because now we have the harvest. And we have the Son of Man with a sickle in his hand. Now, this is an image back to one of the parables of Jesus where he says, don't pull up the weeds, because with the weeds you'll take some of the good wheat. Let them grow, and then when the harvest comes, they'll know what to do. They'll cut it all down and they'll separate the good from the bad. And it's harvest time. The time has come. So what do we get from this? What is our encouragement? We understand that the book of Revelation was given to John so that believers could be encouraged in the midst of their suffering. They are being told that even though times are tough, Jesus will be victorious and would avenge their suffering. The persecutors of the church would not have the last word. What about today? What about what's going on in our world today? The first century, the image of Rome being the evil empire is a functional truth. You can't read the book of Revelation and not see the relationship between Babylon and Rome, between the persecution of the church and the Roman Empire. But today, there are still those that oppose the gospel message. And they are still controlled by the red dragon that is Satan. And just like then, God promises the defeat of the dragon. The dragon will not win. One of my favorite images in literature is found in the book by J.R.R. Tolkien called The Hobbit. And at the end of The Hobbit, the dragon and the mountain. The dragon wants his mountain. The dwarfs want their mountain back. And in the end, there's this huge battle scene between those who want to claim the mountain and the dragon who wants to steal the mountain and kill all the inhabitants. But in the end, the dragon loses. J.R.R. Tolkien got his story, this battle scene, from this vision of Revelation. He's retelling an incredible story. I want to quote you one of my favorite professors from undergraduate school when I was at Milligan. Guy's name was Dr. Lee Magnus. He just recently retired, but I could cite you his His credentials would probably mean nothing to you. The guy was brilliant. He had a way of making things poetic that you would just want to listen to what he said. Let me tell you what he said about this as a final word of encouragement to you. In the midst of suffering, in the midst of the attacks of the dragons and the beast and everybody that seems to be opposing God and his church today, he said this, and let me quote, "In the end, we win."